All right, last week you saw me basically kind of lose my cool at the end of the video because I was just frustrated. I had spent an entire week working on things and it hadn't worked out. Bottom line, I'm okay. I'm not going anywhere. I had a couple guys write in and ask me if I was okay. I'm okay. I mean, I'm probably not okay. I work on old Fords and I enjoy old Fords, so there must be some deep part of me that is absolutely jacked up. But other than that, I'm okay. Another thing I want to ask you to do with what we're talking about today is share this video to groups and Facebook groups that deal with small block Fords, anything from a 289 all the way up to a 351 Cleveland. This will be a boon for a guy that's doing a manual shift transmission in his classic Ford, okay? And what we're about to talk about actually came about because of the problem we had last week trying to start the 302 that's sitting next to me on the floor here. And I wanted to go over this because I called my friend Scott Houseth at National Parts Depot. I said we need to order up a new mid plate because we're having a problem with fitment. I think the fit is off. What it ended up being was not that at all. What it ended up being is a mismatch of parts, which is something that you're going to probably run into if you're working on a classic Mustang, Ford, whatever you're running that's running a manual shift transmission, because over the years people just grab parts thinking that everything's going to be okay, and it's not. And I'm going to tell you now exactly why. First thing is, there are two different depths on the ring gear for the starter on these. Now you know that, right? Because we've talked about the fact that the automatic is a 3/8 inch ring gear setup, and the 4-speeds are all 3/4 inch off the edge of the mid plate. I have since found out that that is not always true. There is no never and always in Ford, and this is another case of no never and always. What you need to do whenever you're going out and working on these is to get yourself a tape measure. All right, so now what you're going to run into is a difference in depth on some manual shift flywheels for the starter ring gear. And there are two different depths. You have a 3/8 inch depth and a 3/4 inch depth before you go off and just order a manual shift or an automatic starter, which I'm going to cover that in just a second. You'll want to go and measure the depth from the facing of the ring gear here to the outside edge of your mid plate. So I'm going to do that here. And this one is basically 3/4 of an inch. So you know now that you can't use the stock shorter starter on this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about those starters. Because this is a 3/4 depth on your ring gear on your mid plate, you're actually going to want to use the longer snout starter, which in most parts catalogs is listed as the automatic starter. If you go down to the auto parts store to get that, you're going to get an automatic starter to do it. If you go to National Parts Depot, they have a little chart that they have on their page. You can be sure to get the right one based off your measurements and everything. I'm putting a picture of what they have available to you to be able to look at right here in front of me. But the reason we were having problems last week is we had put a short snout starter into a situation where it doesn't belong. This starter is what most people call the manual shift starter because it has a shorter snout. You can see a difference in the depth on this. You have this one, the snout is at, well, let's just call it 2 1/4, and this one, the snout is at 1 1/4. And the difference in this allows for the ring gear to sit right in here on the ones with the 3/4 depth ring gear, and the ones with the 3/8 inch ring gear, it can sit right here and it will clear when you put everything together. So here's where the rub comes in. There are also two different mid plates, one for the 164 tooth flywheel and one for the 157 tooth flywheel, which is the quote-unquote more common of the two. That's where you can run into some real issues, because if you have a mid plate that is a 164 combined with a 157 flywheel, it's not going to it's not going to fly. Now they have a difference in the hole in the center as well, and that's between the two. If you're ordering a mid plate, just go to National Parts Depot's site and you can check out what you need to find out on whether you need, which starter you need for this setup. But I will say that the hole size is a 4.0 or a 4.1 in size, and you can take a little dial caliper and go in there and find out what size you have on this opening. All right, so what's next? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about flywheels, because how do you know which flywheel you have? That's actually tough as well, because you can have a 164 tooth flywheel or you can have a 157 tooth flywheel. Both of them are balanced to a 28 ounce imbalance. So that means that you can have either or, and especially when these things are 50 some odd years old, you're looking at a case where things can get mixed and matched, especially if you're buying a basket case engine and car where there's a flywheel sitting on the floor. The guy grabs that flywheel, he grabs a bell housing from somewhere, he hands all this stuff to you and says, you know, go with God, here are your parts, good luck. The only real good way to know which flywheel you have is to do an honest tooth count to either 170 or 157 teeth, or to do a tooth count to 164 teeth, and then you'll know where you need to go from there as far as what to order for bell housing, if you have to order a different bell housing, or whether your mid plate is correct, because one or the other is not going to work. And I really can't tell you which one is which, other than just to say, understand that right now we have the mid plate on this engine is the mid plate for a 157 tooth flywheel. Okay, now that's in the MPD part numbers, that's a 7007-1A. So this is the correct one, and this is the one with the 4.1 opening on it. The other one probably is for the 164 tooth, where you have the 4.0 opening, because they actually clock the starter over based off of the bottom bolt and move it out just a little bit for clearancing on the 164 tooth flywheel. There are no in-betweens. You have either or. You have a 157 or you have a 164 tooth flywheel. All right, so I'm going to talk about bell housings, but first I'm going to review a little of what we got going on. We have 2 starters. We have 2 mid plates. We have 2 flywheels available. 164, 157, both 28 ounce imbalance. And now we're going to dive off into the deep, dark, murky world of bell housings for early Fords. And it's crazy. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is a thing that David Key has on his top loader site. You can go check it out at the link below me here. There's also a link in the description below. This gives you a list out of everything that Ford had as a bell housing for their 4-speed applications back in the day. You can go in there and you can see 428 coverage, you had 390, you can see big block 429, 351 Cleveland, everything. But what we're going to specifically be talking about is the bell housings that Ford used on everything from 289 all the way up to a 351 Cleveland. Now in that line, you have 4 bell housings available. You have the 289 5-bolt bell housing with the 5 bolts on the block. You have the 289 bell housing with the 6-bolt bell housing set up on the block. Then you also have a 6-bolt bell housing that is for the 164 tooth, which is laying on the floor here, unfortunately for me. And then you have a cast iron 289 302 that was released in, I believe, 68. This was probably used on the Boss 302s and may have come about because of what they were doing with their motorsports stuff, at least in the passenger car side. Now keep in mind that cast iron bell housing typically ended up in trucks, okay? So, I will say this. Now this is something I found on the internet, and we all know that the internet is the absolute truth of everything and that they don't lie about things. Not saying people lie, I'm just saying sometimes people will speak out of turn. And I'm going to read you something that I found on the internet. According to things I've read, the 164 tooth bell housing flywheel combo was used on Ford light-duty trucks and on 69 to 73 351 Windsors and 351 Clevelands. So the 164 tooth flywheel is actually for the Cleveland and the Windsor, and it may have leaked off into other things as well. I know that Scott Halseth at NPD says there's a lot of confusion because some people have the 164 tooth flywheel in their 302 car. Now let's just say this happened in 1979. A guy blows his 302 up in the car, a buddy of his has a manual shift pickup truck, and the guy says, hey, I want to convert to a 4-speed, can I buy your truck engine and bell housing set up to put in my car? He gets the cast iron bell housing, which is kind of cool if you're going racing. And he also then gets the 164 tooth possible flywheel, maybe, let's just say. He puts that in the car and everything works honky-dory because it's a 28 ounce imbalance. Now you know why there can be such a plethora of confusion about what goes where. I hope this is clear. It may be clear as mud, but I'm hoping we can use this to help guys figure out exactly how this all works, because it really stymied me last week when I thought I had everything I needed, because I had, you know, the manual shift bell housing, I had a flywheel, and I had a starter. But it didn't turn out that way. Now we have a bell housing out of a 5-liter Mustang, a mid-plate out of a 70s car, and a flywheel that's a C5 part number from the earlier Mustangs, and it's, I believe, a 157 tooth flywheel. The mid-plate and the flywheel talk to each other, the bell housing holds everything together, and via balloon, the engine turns over. I'm not going to show you that right now. That's for next week. We will, next week, be starting this thing or blowing it up. One of the two, I don't know which. Okay? So, you guys be kind to each other, love on each other, treat each other nice. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next time on Autorestomod. If this thing doesn't fire off next Saturday, I'm going to be so hot, you'll probably be able to film me in Idaho. I mean, I'm not going to be a happy boy, because theoretically, everything should be copacetic now. Theoretically. After all this, I feel like I want a beer.